There we go. I declare the meeting has begun. Thank you so much for joining us, and I do appreciate your participation online and those of you who made it through the treacherous rain that we haven't seen in a while, you know. Yeah, we're good. We're good. We made it. It was safe. No flooding in Seaside. We're all okay. All right. So welcome again to the Regional Housing Task Force meeting for the month of September 2024. We will go around and do some quick introductions, then we'll get right into our agenda. Please start us off, Robert.
Robert St. Clair, City of Cannon Beach. Tim Moritz, Northwest Housing Solutions.
Barb Knopf, Mayor of Cannon Beach.
Steve Sokolowski from the City of Cannon Beach.
Jeff Flurry from Seaside. Steve Wright from Seaside.
Tiffany Taylor, Astoria. Alyssa Gertler, Clatsop County Housing Manager.
Jay Blake, Planning Manager for Clatsop County. Let's start up at the top with Brett.
I'm Brett Estes. I'm the North Coast Regional Representative for the Department of Land Conservation and Development.
All right, Amanda.
I'm Amanda from City of Astoria.
Hi, Amanda. Jess.
Hi, everyone. This is Jess Salacio, Commissioner in the City of Warrenton.
Gail.
Hi, I'm Gail Henriksen, Community Development Director for Clatsop County.
Elizabeth's iPad.
Elizabeth Adams, City of Astoria, City Council.
Great, glad you're here. All right. Our agenda has a couple of items on it. Some of them are going to make us feel good, some of them not so much. And I want to say thank you to Gail Henriksen for being our Debbie Downer for the day. And she's going to share with us some information related to the FEMA BIOP and HUD program project changes that are going to impact our ability potentially to provide housing in our region. So Gail, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jay. I actually prefer to be called the Harbinger of Doom, but you can call me whatever you like, as long as you don't come late for dinner. So I'm here today to give a little overview of the FEMA biological opinion and another topic related to floodplain development and some impacts that we're going to be seeing in terms of regulation and how that might impact our housing construction goals here in Clatsop County. So I'm going to start off first with a program that some of you may be less familiar with, which is the Federal Flood Risk Management Standards, or FFRMS. And these originally came out of an executive order that was initiated or signed in January of 2015. And then in 2017, the order was revoked and it was reinstated again in 2021. And what this executive order does is it requires every federal agency to consider the risks of from flood and future flooding when they are funding and constructing projects. And so you will see that over the next few months, you're going to see more and more of this, but it began initially in April this year when HUD finalized its rules. And the majority of their rules became effective in June of this year. The remainder, which are the ones that we are really concerned about or that will have the most impact on us, take effect on January 1st, 2025. And these rules that take effect in January next year are going to apply to all HUD-funded projects and to all FHA-backed loans and mortgages. So what these changes do is they have several things that they're doing. So first of all, they have taken the special flood hazard maps that FEMA has prepared, and they've created an expanded version of the potential floodplain. And so this expanded floodplain takes into account potential effects from climate change, and it creates some additional requirements on top of what our local jurisdictions are already doing if you are using HUD money to construct housing or if you are using an FHA loan to purchase a home for yourself. And so if you are using HUD funds to construct, you will now have to build 2 feet above the base flood elevation. and 3 feet above base flood elevation if you're considered a critical facility. So right now, most of our codes, I think in Clatsop County and throughout the state of Oregon, require a 1 foot freeboard above the base flood elevation. So as you are having projects reviewed or working with people who are using HUD funds to construct housing in a floodplain, you will need to make sure that they are aware of these additional requirements. The other thing that it will really impact more on a day-to-day basis as we're working at our counters is that anybody who is purchasing a home that is in the special flood hazard area and they have an FHA-backed mortgage, they will need to make sure that depending upon the age of the house, if it's new construction, that new home is at least 2 feet above the base flood elevation. And so this is something we don't normally check for because we check to meet our minimum codes. So unless we want to go through the process of updating our codes to include that 2 foot, it's just something we're going to have to be cognizant of and be a little nosy and ask people, do you have a mortgage? Is it FHA backed? How old is your house? Has anybody lived in it before? So it's going to require a little bit of effort on our part. And the concern is that if for some reason potential buyers are not aware of this, they could lose their mortgage funding if they purchase a home that doesn't meet this new 2 foot requirement. And that's both of these will go into effect on January of 2025. And then if you are doing new manufactured dwellings that are using FHA loans, you are going to have to place it on ground that is already above the base flood elevation. And then there's additional disclosures that will need to be provided to renters and providers as sales and leases are signed. So I am going to stop there. Those are the 2 slides I think I have. Oh, wait, I have one more on this, and then I'll pause for questions about this one. So as I already said, most of the other HUD rules that won't really affect us are in effect right now, but the ones we care about, the 2 I just talked about, those will go into effect on January 1st. FEMA has also recently adopted similar rules for any projects constructed with FEMA funds. So that would include brick funding, if you're using that to build emergency structures or use resiliency funding to, update structures and things like that. So all those new rules will apply. And then I think over the next few months, we're going to see additional federal agencies come through with their own regulations related to this. And remains unclear how that may or may not impact housing here in Clatsop County. So I will pause there for questions about the federal flood risk management standards. Any questions about those?
I'll ask one, Gail. Have you talked to Clatsop County realtors about this? Because this seems to be a situation that's going to really affect them.
Yeah, I have not spoken with them. We had our public affairs office do an info sheet for the realtors, but I have not actually scheduled a meeting or spoken to them about it.
Thanks, Jay. In my day job, I'm actually the association executive for the Clatsop Association, and I've brought this up to the board, and we have been sharing information with the local association. But anything else that you have, please feel free to send my way and I will pass it along.
Okay. I'm also happy to come and talk. I tell the realtors all the time, I'd love to come and talk to you on a quarterly basis, and no one has ever taken me up on it.
Gail, I've got a question as well. In terms of the county or cities asking questions about mortgage, is there liability that comes back to the county later on? For instance, if we don't ask, do you have an FHA backed mortgage? And all of a sudden they get into trouble, is there any potential liability for the local unit of government?
That's a good question. I did not sleep at a Holiday Inn Express last night, so I don't have my attorney hat on, but I think that's a good question that we'd each want to run by each of our county council or city councilors.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. All right. Any other questions about the federal flood risk standards?
Just a quick comment. So HUD funds in a project could mean things like anything where there's a voucher that comes from the housing authority, right? Or anybody who's gonna be, and so anything that's gonna be subsidized affordable housing that has a voucher in it, this will affect. And we're already seeing it with Hawkeye where they have a little hang up with the federal process. It may affect also our Pacifica project, so we'll have to keep talking about that.
Go ahead, Gail.
Sorry, Gail, just to
Okay.
join.
Okay, so the real reason why you all showed up for today's meeting is so that we can commiserate about the implementation of the biological opinion. And I have found it to be extremely frustrating. And usually I work for government. Well, I usually work for government. I do work for government, and I understand how government works, but this one has completely blown my mind. So we'll just dive right into it. So just to give a little bit of background and context, this all started back in 2009 when the Portland Audubon Society filed a lawsuit basically against the services, the fisheries, and NOAA and FEMA stating that they had not run the impacts from the National Flood Insurance Program through an impact assessment or an environmental statement, and that we did not know the impacts that allowing building in the floodplain would be having on endangered species. It's kind of the long and the short of it. So after the lawsuit was filed, they negotiated a settlement in 2010, and then FEMA started this process to submit for a formal consultation with the National Marine Fisheries Services to determine the impacts and what steps could be taken to address those. And that process itself took about 5 years, and we did not get the final report back from the Fisheries Services until 2016. And that was called the biological opinion, or BIOP for short. So when we talk about BIOP, that's what we're talking about. It's this report that was issued by the National Marine Fisheries Services discussing the impacts to 16 fish species and the southern resident killer whale, or the orca whale. And so we get this report back in 2016, and then FEMA spends the next 5 years working with different stakeholders and representatives trying to put together a draft implementation plan that addresses all these concerns raised in the BIOP. And then FEMA hit, COVID hits, things kind of slowed down a little bit, but in spring of 2023, FEMA put forward a notice of intent that they were going to prepare their environmental impact statement. And that impact statement basically looks at the economic, social, environmental, and I always forget the energy, maybe the 50, 30 impacts of how implementing the solutions to address the threats to the endangered species and loss of habitat would impact the communities that had to work through it. And so they started this process in 2023. In June, there was a big opportunity for communities and individuals to submit public comments on FEMA's plan. And so they took all that, and then the public comment period closed. And during that time, FEMA had been telling communities that they would not require any implementation until they completed this environmental impact process. And so communities relied on that. But then in July of this year, they suddenly announced that communities would be required to choose a pre-implementation compliance measure, which I think is kind of ironic because you're having pre-implementation to comply with something that you don't know what the actual compliance measures will ultimately be, but we are here nonetheless. So communities were notified back on July 15th that they would have to choose one of 3 options: either prohibit development completely within the special flood hazard area, adopt a model code, or require applicants to prepare on a permit by permit basis their own individual habitat assessment. And so they held this series of meetings and workshops throughout the summer to introduce this concept to local communities to begin to try and answer questions. But it took them well over a month after they started this process and after they announced that communities had to do this before they even released the model ordinance or the habitat assessment guide. So that left all of our communities with a very reduced window of opportunity to choose a pick'em and to adopt it and implement it by that December 1st deadline. So you can skip that one. So one of the things that's in the model ordinance that is a pretty big change is right now we have a definition of development that those of us who participate in the flood insurance program have adopted that basically looks at the definition of development as a very broad definition, and it includes almost everything. But under the model ordinance, that definition gets expanded even further to include things like subdivision of land, where you're not actually doing any work in the ground. You are doing work on paper, but that will now be considered development. If you're doing removal of vegetation, if you're altering any of the natural site characteristics, that is going to be considered development. If you're doing substantial repairs and improvements to a building, and if you are doing maintenance, repair, or remodeling of a building, and you are expanding the footprint in any way, shape, or form, that all now becomes included in that definition of development. So we will have a lot of activities that will cross our counters in the permitting stage that are going to trip this requirement. And to give us consolation, it will affect 31 of the 36 counties throughout the state and 239 jurisdictions. So we are not alone in this. And then you can see here in Clatsop County where the areas that are not gray, the green areas, those are the areas that are going to be impacted by this. And so we know that FEMA is also looking at new draft flood maps, and that the areas in Warrenton and Astoria and in limited parts of unincorporated Clatsop County, potentially as of 2025, we will have maps released for public comment that will expand that special flood hazard area. So while we're being impacted right now, we potentially will have more parcels and lots throughout the county that will also be impacted in the coming couple of years. So we talked about the three pick'ems, prohibit development, adopt a model ordinance, or require the habitat assessment permit by permit. If jurisdictions don't pick one of these three options by December 1st, you will automatically default to option 3, which is the habitat assessment. So the concern is, and something that FEMA has not been able to fully address, and we're hoping that DLCD will help address with its upcoming fact sheet, is that we have all baked our floodplain requirements into our zoning codes and our development standards, and we can't just willy-nilly say, without changing our codes, this is our new process. And we know that it's a long process. We have to go to our planning commissions, we have to go to our city councils and our board of commissioners and go through several public hearings and have the public input and do the 35-day PAPA notice. So it's not a quick process to change our codes. And I think many of us at this point are hitting that deadline where we're not going to be able to make that December 1st deadline. And then we find ourselves in the position of either trying to enforce a habitat assessment requirement with nothing in our codes to back it up, or we issue permits under our current codes and then we run into the possibility of running afoul of FEMA because we are no longer compliant with our codes, which means we could be ultimately, worst case scenario, ousted out of the NFIP, and not only can people not get in flood insurance at that point, but we lose our eligibility for emergency assistance. So it is a very serious thing, at least in my mind, how we work through this process and remain compliant while trying to put the least burden on our applicants and our property owners and people who do want to come in and develop lands within our jurisdiction. So it's a really big thing. We can go through each of the pick'ems if you want. We had at one point put together some information for our Board of Commissioners, just kind of rating the options in terms of, pros and cons. Obviously, prohibiting all development within the flood hazard area is the easiest option. You just say no to people and, go back to whatever you were working on before that. And you can be sure that you are then 100% compliant with anything that comes out of the biological opinion. The concerns obviously would be, what are the potential taking issues when you tell somebody that no, you can no longer develop your properties. And so, that's kind of the pros and cons of that one. The second option is to adopt a model ordinance. And that's probably the easiest route to go in terms of doing what FEMA wants you to do in terms of changing your code. But if you have read through the model ordinance that FEMA put out, I think this is just my opinion. I think they rushed it. I think they were facing a lot of pressure to get that model ordinance out. And you can tell the difference between the detail and thoughtfulness that has gone into the habitat assessment guide versus the pages highlighted in yellow that they slapped onto the end of the current model ordinance for the floodplain issues. That's just my private opinion, to be shared here publicly. But so the model ordinance has a lot of requirements. There are new mitigation requirements that are part of that. You're mitigating for loss of capacity, you're mitigating for loss of pervious area, and you will be mitigating for removal of trees greater than 6 inches in diameter. And so you're going to have to work through, if you adopt a model ordinance, you as staff then are going to be the ones who are going to have to determine what are the impacts, what is the loss of capacity, what is the loss of the volume of water, what is the loss of the pervious surface, how many trees are taken down, how many trees need to be replaced. And I think that responsibility is going to ultimately fall on us as staff for the most part. But in terms of actually putting an ordinance together, it's very simple. You can cut and paste, but implementation, I think, will be a little bit harder. And then I think option 3, which is the habitat assessment, and that puts the burden completely on the applicant for the most part, I think is the hardest one to undertake, because there is a lot of technical information that is required to complete the habitat assessment in terms of hydraulics, in terms of vegetation, in terms of impacts to endangered species, and in determining the mitigation that's required. And it's really, I think, going to require a professional to do that. And in fact, FEMA has said you would need a qualified professional. We define as a jurisdiction who our qualified professionals can be. But it's going to add a lot of time and at least cost to the applicant onto their permitting process as they try to work through this. And it's a 47-page habitat assessment guide that you can hand out at the counter to potential applicants and just say, here you go, here's your guide, and come back in 6 months after you've found a consultant and we'll talk again. So, and I know Brett's looking at me going, she's very snarky and sarcastic, but it is mind-boggling. And so in addition to this, once you choose your pick'em, regardless of whether you choose one or don't, beginning on January 31st of next year, you will need to begin collecting data. And that data will be reported annually to FEMA beginning in January of 2026. And they are going to want information about, for each of your floodplain permits, the amount of fill, compensatory storage, and new impervious surfaces that were created, areas that have been cleared and graded, the actual dimensions and area, the number of trees removed that were greater than 6 inches in diameter. They're going to ask you to track the numbers of acres that were either disconnected or reconnected to the floodplain. And I'm not sure how we're going to figure that one out. And then the total amount of mitigation provided for all activities that occurred in the special flood hazard area. So if you haven't started thinking about revising your applications yet, you will probably want to think about doing that as well. And you're going to have to start collecting all this information in the coming year. And so the time frame. So we are now near the end of September 2024. We are still waiting for FEMA to announce the schedule of their technical trainings on how to implement either the model ordinance or the habitat assessment. And we still have not heard anything on that. So we then will have to either adopt our pickums by December 1st, and FEMA is still working through that NEPA process, and they expect that come 2027, they will begin to fully implement the final plan. And what we have been told is that even though we are required to adopt the pickum and implement it this year, that there will likely be more changes coming out of the final implementation plan that will require additional changes to our codes. So this is not a one and done deal, that we will be working on this for the next several years. Clatsop County, our Board of Commissioners has not yet chosen a pick'em. We are doing another work session with our board on November 6th, hopefully after we've been able to attend the FEMA trainings, so we can provide them with more information and they can make a better decision. And then because we will not be able to choose and implement by December 1st, we are taking a moratorium to the board on November 13th that would be effective immediately if it's approved. That would temporarily halt the issuance of floodplain permits until the end of February 2025, so that staff can have time, once the board does choose a pick'em, that we can go through the adoption process and but still remain in compliance with FEMA during the time between December 1st and whenever we complete that adoption. So again, I apologize for the snark, but it's just been an enormously frustrating experience, and I think you all can relate to that. But I am here to answer questions. So, and unless everybody's crying in their beers, in which case I'll just go on with life. But thank you.
How close are you guys to having your draft application so I can copy it?
We actually are having a meeting about it tomorrow, and Rebecca's been working on it, so we'll probably have it done in another week or so.
Gail, will you speak to some of the larger political, not just the technical conversation that's happening about this?
Yeah, so most of you in the room are probably aware that the Board of Commissioners, the chair, and the 5 mayors of the cities in Clatsop County have prepared letters and signed letters that went out to FEMA directly and also to our federal delegation at the state level. And the main point of the letters was to request that FEMA delay implementation of this until at least March of 2025, so that we didn't have that December deadline looming over us. There are just so many implications of how this could play out that, you know, we are all here talking about housing, and then we have to work with the housing requirements that are coming down to us. We have to work within the new FEMA requirements that are coming down to us. We are working on trying to increase economic development, and in the case of unincorporated county and some of our special districts, we are dealing with fiscal impacts that are going to be coming from the approval of the Habitat Conservation Plan. So we have all these forces coming down on us, and it's, I think, very frustrating, at least for the county elected officials. I can't speak for the cities, but it's just been a very frustrating time for them. And I don't know if that answered your question, Alyssa, but.
I think if I could just add to that, there was first initially a letter from their congressional delegation that went to FEMA. And then there was the secondary letter that came directly from the elected officials here in Clatsop County. And I don't think we've had any direct response. Have we, Gail?
No. In fact, I had a conversation with the county manager this morning, and to date, there has not been any response.
Hey, Gail, yeah, I want to chime in on that. But first I want to say the frustration that every one of you are feeling is being felt at DLCD as well. DLCD was involved with FEMA in development of the the long-term ordinance that was to roll out sometime next year, but we learned about the Pick'em the same time as everyone else did. And there was not any integration or conversation between FEMA and DLCD when they rolled out the Pick'em. So we're in the process of also digging into this and working to answer questions the best we can. As Gail had mentioned, we are developing a list of frequently asked questions. I'm hoping that that comes out sooner rather than later. I understand it's proving to be a little bit challenging to make sure that we get good, correct legal answers for you, and that's why it's taking a little bit more time. Gail, I want to touch on some information I got yesterday at another meeting with Tillamook County. It's this same type of meeting where the various jurisdictions were talking about their approaches that they were going to take in implementing the Pick'em. One of the jurisdictions asked about the possible extension of the December deadline, and Sarah Absher, who is the Clatsop, the Tillamook County Planning Director, had stated to the group that she understands that it will take an act of the United States Congress to, and this is not facetious, this is a true statement, that because of the lawsuit between FEMA and the other parties, that it will take the U.S. Senate and House to be able to extend this. And so I guess what Sarah had stated is that there are conversations going on with Congresswoman Bonamici. I guess there's going to be moving forward on that. So that is not information that I have from internal to my organization, but at least something that I'd heard from Sarah Absher at Tillamook County at a meeting yesterday.
Right, so we're all marching in DC then.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Congress is gonna be super busy between the.
I was just gonna say, and this is a great time to get anything through the legislature just before an election. It's just, yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, any other comments or questions for Gail on this? I've heard this presentation, Gail, and I know from working in the office that this has been a real challenge to wrap your head around just the speed at which the demand has been made on the local units of government. So I just, again, you are kind of the guru. Everyone's going to you to learn about this, I hear.
Oh, your bars are so low. I'm sorry. But anyway, thank you for your time, and I am available for questions, and I will share our application once we get it developed. So
I have a question if anyone can hear me.
Garrett.
Is anyone, Gail, is the county or any of the other cities, are any of you considering trying to give applicants the option to either comply with the standards of the model ordinance or follow the habitat assessment guidelines process, essentially doing both?
That's something I've been looking at and kind of weighing in Seaside before I go talk to the mayor and the council about it, to see, what benefit would that have to the city? For me, letting the applicant pick their path might actually cut down on review time, depending on who the qualified expert is that can provide these habitat assessments. And I don't want to throw Denise under the bus here, but is Crest going to be one of those agencies that is going to be our qualified expert, because they cover the broad range of items that are listed into that assessment guide. So for me in Seaside, yeah, it is something that I have thought about and potentially be exploring on, do we want to do both paths 2 and 3 and let the developer choose?
Yeah, and Jeff, I can just jump in really quickly. I've been watching this. We haven't internally had any discussions about it, but I assumed that the communities would be asking for our assistance. And so on our end, that will more than likely mean staffing up a little bit more because, on the planning side, we have Garrett. And so we will more than likely need to staff up a little bit, but it's been something I've been thinking about, but yes. I mean, my hope is that we'd be able to assist. I'm just gonna have to figure out how we do that.
And, for example, for Wahkiakum County in Washington, Crest provides review services for the local government when they're reviewing applicants' critical areas assessments, which might be something is what the habitat assessments end up looking like. So we're not typically working for applicants in Washington, for example, but we do provide reviews for the local government there. That's one way of thinking about it.
One other thing I would just note, for those jurisdictions who are considering moratoria, what I would say is in following the Oregon revised statutes, there is a provision that you notify the Department of Land Conservation and Development. It's not a 35-day notice like a PAPA. There are some prescriptive timeframes in the Oregon revised statute, but you can use the PAPA database to do that notification to the Department of Land Conservation and Development. But it's just a different statutory element, but you can use the database to provide notice to us if you're going that route.
Yeah, it's a 45-day notice compared to 35 days. And then if your moratorium will cover urbanizable lands or urban lands, you're limited to an initial 120-day moratorium. And there are certain findings you have to provide that are listed out in the ORS. And then if you're we're the only ones working with rural lands, so it doesn't really matter. But there are separate criteria for rural lands as well. So.
All right. Alyssa, do you want to add anything or wait till the end?
My question is really for Brett about how we're gonna approach our Oregon housing needs analysis targets with this. And so we actually have an agenda item later to talk about the Oregon housing needs analysis. So
you know what we're gonna do?
We'll do it later.
We're gonna circle back is what we're gonna do. We're gonna circle back to that at the end of the meeting and we'll cover it there. So Gail, if you need to bug out, otherwise, thank you so much for your information.
Nope, thank you.
All right, great. I am going to introduce the next speaker, who is me, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the economic opportunities analysis. The economic opportunities analysis, or EOA, is an extension of the county's comprehensive plan that focuses on economic development opportunities, and it is a land exercise originally designed to determine where we are going to urbanize. But counties have been using it to help cities decide on expansions of UGBs and to create new urban areas. Not that that's happened very often, but ours started out that direction and has gone a little bit different direction. So if we flip it through here, the EOA gives us analysis of our historic and current and future conditions economically. We have what we call the big three: fishing, forestry, and fun. We look at environmental policies. We look at the tourism changes. We look at changes in fishing, changes in forestry. All of the things that Gail has mentioned are things that are going to have an impact on us from the economic development standpoint. Then we take a look at Then we take a look at the buildable lands inventory, which takes in an urban area is a fairly simple process. You're looking at developed lands, redevelopable lands, and vacant lands. In an unincorporated area, we have to look at where do we have sewer, where do we have water, where do we not have floodplain, where do we have historic development. So there's a different layer of analysis that we have to do. We then look at our employment trends, where are our growth opportunities, what sectors should we be moving towards, and then we're establishing goals and action steps. I think one of the things that I'll mention today is we've said since 1980 we need to diversify our economy. We said it again in 1995, in 2004, 2014, and we are still saying it. that we need to expand from the big three. Go ahead, next. What we did find is that right now, our unemployment rate is lower than the state average. The last time we did an EOA or an economic review, that wasn't the case. Wage levels, however, are also lower than the state average. And that really indicates who our major employers are in terms of numbers of people. Our big three industries, fishing, forestry, and recreation and tourism, are cyclical in nature. They're seasonal, but they are also economically cycle driven. So the forestry industry goes up and down, the fishing industry goes up and down, and tourism goes up and down, all at different rates and at different times. Right now, there's external threats to our big three. We talk about the FEMA BIOP, we talk about the HCP, there's a number of other federal and state regulations that are impacting the developability of lands, especially in unincorporated areas. And future job growth, according to the state, is going to be in construction, healthcare, food processing, and information and technology sectors for our region. Those are the big four. So, can we diversify? Yeah, go ahead.
Is the picture, you're trying to recruit Boeing to come down? Is
This is Lectro.
They're looking for a new home.
Yeah, they probably are. This is Lectro at the Astoria Warrenton Airport. They make electric tugs to pull.
Very cool.
Yeah, it's the mayor of Warrenton's. I asked for a picture of the mayor of Warrenton on one of these, and he actually sent me a dozen, but I chose not to use it.
Thirst traps.
Yeah, it was. It was like, oh, like on that one. The next one, next slide. So, we also looked at human resources, not just our economic resources, but we're an aging population, and we are aging faster than the state of Oregon because old people from other parts of the state have decided that this is kind of an okay place to be. Hence, the problem with the bingo party earlier, taking the big room and using our TV, yeah. So, but that aging population has a couple of impacts. Number one, it reduces the percentage of people in the workforce. People who are moving here aren't necessarily moving here for jobs, they're moving for other reasons.
And those people have higher incomes, right?
And they have higher incomes than the people who actually work and live here. And there's some great stats that we aren't gonna go into, but thank you for mentioning it, it's true. Household income is rising, but it is not rising as fast as other areas of the state of Oregon. We're not keeping pace. House prices are also increasing. I have a statistic in the report that talks about that since 1970, the average household income has risen 835% in Clatsop County since 1970, so 50 years. That's pretty good. But the price of a house, the average price of a house has gone up 5,300%. So our household income has not kept pace with the cost of the housing in our area. And that's a theme that you're going to hear today because of who I'm presenting to, but that's really part of our economy.
We need a task force.
Oh, good. Here we're going. All right. Housing availability and affordability were the two top threats identified in the public questionnaire that we're going to talk about next. Go ahead. We did a questionnaire, we had 184 responses. We asked how long have they lived here. Most of the people who have lived, who answered the question, almost 60% have lived here for a longer period of time. I just barely made it into that more than 10 years. So next one. Which of the following statements? I'm a student, I don't work, I've retired, I own a business, I work part-time. I work full-time. 35% of the people who answered the question said they work full-time, and another 11% part-time. This is the next one I thought was kind of interesting. Do you work from home? Of the people who responded, 27% said, yes, we work from home. That question wasn't asked 20 years ago when we last did this kind of community survey. So that's a new trend that we were trying to figure out how to address.
What did that stat look like 20 years ago though, Jay?
We don't know.
Was it available?
We never asked. We didn't ask.
Trend, was it, you know?
This is
If
coming
they asked
to,
it 20 years ago, would there?
I don't know.
Availability, that's.
I think it would have been pretty low. It would have been pretty low. Next one. What are the three top reasons to live or work here? Number one, natural beauty. Number two, oceans. Number three, safe place. Number four, family in the area. it's kind of a good place to be.
Where is coolness of mayors?
Other at the top there. All right, next one.
I'll pay you later.
All right. This is the one that I really like, and look at that. What are the challenges to future economic health? Pick up to 5. Number 1 and number 2, housing cost, housing availability, by far. Then behind that, lack of rail and air service, lack of available land, environmental impacts, education and training, and then they slowly go down from that. But that was the stat of the survey, I think. Next one.
Jay, just
Yeah, go ahead.
on that one.
Yeah.
Back up.
Yeah.
There were a significant amount of people that were kind of older in the population.
There's 9 people.
Is there any way you could parse that out by age?
You know, I could, and I didn't, but that's a great question.
I think it's gonna look worse to, people like me that moved here. Housing's not a big issue, because I'm in the house I'm gonna get carried out of. And so, I still listed that as a high item, because I knew it was, but other people think of their situation, when they think that way.
So a younger person, maybe 35 with a family, might rate that even higher.
Way up
Yeah,
there.
that, I think I'll have to take a look at that stat to see if I can parse that. I think that's a good question.
We need the crosstabs so we can really.
Yeah, I know, exactly.
Well, that, and also looking at not just the age of the population, but that time frame. Did they just move here and is housing a big issue for them? Because a lot of people that just move here because they have housing here.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. What types of businesses should we be encouraging? This is a very broad question. Again, it's not a scientific survey, but healthcare, number 1. We need more healthcare. But healthcare is a broad area too. It's not just doctors, it's medical assistants, it's people taking care of people at the nursing home. All of those things are part of that healthcare industry. Construction and trades, tech, businesses, recreation and tourism, light manufacturing, and arts and entertainment come in that second tier area. So, next slide. All right. We also asked for comments. And one of the written comments that I had not anticipated, but is an obvious concern, is daycare. Childcare services is a huge issue for younger working families. That was written in quite a number of times, and so I've added it there. Infrastructure concerns, sewer, water, traffic, transit, all of those things that make a whole community are concerned. Tech workers, there was comments about we need more tourism, we need less tourism, we need more industry, we need less industry. It's a great place to live. Too many people are living here. I mean, but it was just kind of an interesting thing to give people a chance to vent. Hit the thing. It's a great place to hide. That was my favorite one of all of the responses. It's a great place to hide. Okay, keep going.
Is that from Gail?
I don't know where that was from. So one of the things that I've done is I've added childcare and daycare into an infrastructure section of the plan. It is an important part of the economy, is that people who have to work need that childcare services. And so I've kind of looped that in. Next one, if you would. Okay, we're gonna skip through this. Buildable lands inventory, just keep going. Keep going, keep going, keep going. We don't have any land. In the unincorporated areas of Clatsop County, there is very limited land available because the land that's out there was old historic tourist commercial sites along 26 and 30. And or mill sites along the river. And those have enormous environmental constraints on them now that they didn't have 100 to 200 years ago when these types of businesses started. Plus, we have some other factors. We have the FEMA buyout. We have other issues that are coming down the pike, and please don't blame Gail. Gail is not the one, she is just the messenger on this. Next one. Living wage jobs. That's always one that gets thrown out when you talk about economic development. We need more living wage jobs. We need more middle class jobs. That was a comment from yesterday.
Yeah.
So I spent a little bit of time in this. MIT did a study for every county in the United States, trying to estimate what a living wage was for each of those counties. This is what it was for Clatsop County in 2022. Now the chart's messy, but let me explain it. If you have one adult working and they have one child, a living wage job in Clatsop County is $37.84 an hour. Okay. If you have two adults working and two children, each of the adults need to be making $26.79 an hour. Do we have a question?
Oh, we have a hand, yes.
Yeah, go ahead. Who's up?
It's me. Jay, one thing about the living wage too, how does this include people's ability to save for retirement, rainy day funds, dining out? Like what type of flexibility and scope is actually a living wage? Because from what I've heard is a living wage is literally the bare minimum that you need to pay your bills. And if we actually want people to be able to save for retirement, this is not going to cut it. Is that correct?
Yes, if you look at the MIT methodology, it is not an expansive list of things that they included in their living wage. It was things like insurance and food and housing and gasoline and healthcare, but it was not one where it included things like, oh, a great 401k program or other things that allow people to have a middle-class life.
Yeah.
But the thing that I do like about the study is that it's consistently applied across the country. The same methodology was used for every county. And I would also argue that that number, even within Clatsop County, varies based on the price of housing in Westport versus Arch Cape or Astoria versus Jewel. So that number can vary, but they had to select a number for each of the counties. I will tell you that our living wage estimate is lower than Portland, but higher than other non-recreational counties in Oregon. Okay, next one.
So comparable to other recreational counties.
Correct. Other recreational counties, the coastal counties, Deschutes County and Hood River, I believe are the ones here. This is a messy chart, but I'm going to explain it in just a few words. The state is predicting growth in our jobs of 9% from 2022 to 2032. So 9% growth in the jobs. These are the jobs that are going to grow faster and slower than 9%. So at the top, the fastest growing job that's predicted for Northwestern Oregon is healthcare support occupations. Do you remember what I said about a living wage job? If you have two of them working a living wage job with two kids, they need to be making $26 an hour. The fastest growing jobs in our region don't pay that. That's not a criticism. It's just a fact of life. Now, there are other jobs that are going to grow faster than that average that do pay that. But not everyone wants to be a math geek. Not everyone wants to be a social service provider. Not everyone wants to work in construction. But there are some jobs in that higher area that can pay a living wage job. So food preparation, that's not food processing. That's the people working at the restaurant. Buildings and grounds, those are our maintenance people who are driving around in pickup trucks and providing a service to thousands of people all around our county. The jobs that are growing the slowest, farming, fishing, and forestry. They're predicting a 0% growth in 10 years. Okay.
The big three.
Can we rely on that to create the future economy? No, we can't. Go ahead if you want to keep going through here. Oh, I forgot I circled these just because I wanted to make a point. Cool. I know, isn't that pretty impressive? All right. The plan itself is based on 6 foundational blocks. 1, job training programs that meet the need of the current and future businesses will need to bridge the gap between employees and future jobs. We need to retrain ourselves so we're not training for the jobs of the past. The housing crisis is restricting economic growth, including infrastructure limitations, shortages of developable land, and construction employees. I said this yesterday. As I drove to work yesterday, there were 10 pickup trucks sitting along Highway 101. Every one of them had 1 or 2 people sleeping in them. I'm sure they're all working construction. Or maybe surfing, but I'm just saying, or both, maybe they're doing both. But the housing crisis is restricting businesses' ability to grow. We can't get enough housing built. It's restricting the economy. And so that's where the tie is between what Alyssa's project is working on and what mine is. Shifting employment trends in traditional resource-based jobs will require the support of research, innovation, and entrepreneurs. We need to be training people to do the next generation of fishing, the next generation of environmental protection, the next generation of forestry. So that we need to be in that job training area. County population is going to grow, mostly due to in-migration. The demographics will continue to age and a smaller percentage of the population will be in the workforce. That is a major concern in 20 years. All right. Unincorporated employment-based land will not significantly change. We're not going to get a new city in Jewel. I don't know that that's a good thing, but that's not going to happen. You know, you don't have the ability to essentially plan an entire new community and expand massively. That's just not how the state planning regulations work in Oregon. Locational advantages for the county include water, forest resources, recreational opportunities, and a proximity to the metropolitan area and educational facilities. We have a lot of advantages. We just need to figure out how to capitalize on them. We're going to go fast now. Here we go. Goal statements. Broke them into 4. Economic aspirations, housing our residents, creating a safe and healthy community, and creating a resilient community. Housing our residents is one of the 4 goals of this plan. Because without housing our residents, we can't have the employees to provide the services that we need. We're going to end up with action steps. What is the county role and what are our partner organizations? Click through here. I'm going to take just a few seconds here. These are the growth sectors that are going to hopefully diversify our economy. The blue economy includes everything from tourism to water transport. That's, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. A different organization I would. Healthcare and wellness. We're going to be focusing on creating a healthcare hub here. Construction and resources sector. How are we going to build the housing? And food processing. We already have seafood processing, brewing, distilleries. How do we allow them to expand and still have a wastewater treatment system that works? All of those things come together. Another item is we have talked about, and we're not today, tech nomads, the working from home people. Next one. I love this line. The path to economic diversity is not moving away from what we're good at, rather it's capitalizing on our assets to be the assets of the next economy. Get us ready to be the next thing. The last thing I'm going to end on was something that David Reed from the Astoria Chamber said to me at a meeting and then reiterated it yesterday at Cedar. Clatsop County is almost always on the defensive when it comes to our economy. We get told what we're going to be doing. They tell us what the new regulations are for fishing. What are the new regulations for wastewater? What are the new regulations for forestry? We all get told that. And the common response has been, you turn to tourism. Well, tourism is a good thing, but tourism doesn't provide, it is cyclical in nature and doesn't always provide the highest level of the jobs that we're replacing are not at the same level. So from an economy standpoint, it's not good for us to put all of our eggs in one basket. And so his point was, we need to be more assertive. We need to tell the state who we want to be and go for it. And that's what we're hoping to do here. Housing is one of the 4 biggies. Construction and resource sectors, that's one of our goals to help diversify so that we can build those houses so that people can live here. Let's see what I ended with. Keep going. Keep going. Next steps. Public open houses, Saturday, October 26th at the Seaside Public Library from 10 to noon. We will have an opportunity for people to come in, participate, see the information, see large pieces of paper, see presentations.
And come in costume, right?
We sure could. We sure could. It is, yes. Then we have a meeting in the north. It's going to be at the CMH Coho meeting room on Mondays the 4th, the day before the election. And we're going to then take those comments and additional information to the Planning Commission, on November 12th, and tentative schedule for Board of Commissioners in December and January. The final, or no, excuse me, the draft document will be done by October 15th and will be distributed for public review, and everyone who wants it can get it. So, questions or comments?
Thanks for using my photo.
I should give you credit for that, so, all right, yeah, go ahead.
I presented to our council on Monday night, just an annual report. One of the stats that I came across with that I thought was kind of shocking, when I ran reports of our building department's programs. The city of Seaside permitted over $29 million worth of work in the last fiscal year, of construction work.
Yeah.
And any contractors in the room, we know how you all bid your jobs, and then you tell us what the permit cost is significantly lower typically than what it actually costs. But that's what they told us what it cost.
Yeah.
And so $29 million in last fiscal year just in construction work in Seaside, only in
Yes.
Seaside.
Yep. It's amazing. And those contractors are busy. And we have contractors coming up from outside the area into our area to build things that, you know, are pretty amazing sometimes. So in the end, the EOA is hopefully going to be a call to action and a work program for people and organizations doing economic development in Clatsop County. We need to recognize we can't do it the same way we've always done it. I said this yesterday, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different response is the definition of insanity. So we're going to try and change that. So any comments from up above? I think the one other thing that I will add is that this EOA is not promoting urbanization of areas outside of the cities. What we want to do is find ways to help the cities capitalize on the industrial and commercial lands that you have. And we're not trying to create new areas, but how can we best use the areas that we have for employment and tax base? Because we need to be concerned about those issues. Oops.
One thing.
Go ahead, Jess.
Again. I'm really excited about the EA. Thank you for all your work in this. And the FEMA was not as exciting, but I appreciate all of the context because it really helps to navigate what the opportunities are as we figure out these challenges. But the only two things I would add about EOA is with infrastructure, childcare is often forgotten about as infrastructure, and without childcare, people can't get to work, but just like if we don't have roads. So I think it's really important that we emphasize how critical childcare is. As a mother of two small children, I feel this acutely. And another aspect to this is childcare is incompatible with capitalism. There's no way we can get childcare to work in our community if it's not subsidized. And we have to figure out a sustainable strategy to get childcare workers paid, because I can guarantee you they are not being paid the living wage, let alone enough to save for their own children's college, let alone enough to pay for a rainy day. This is a huge concern, not only of mine, but of our community. And I think there's a lot of ideas out there. I know Astoria Parks and Rec, they provide a building to Bumble. That's a strategy that we could use and maybe employ across the county with these partnerships. So I would love to figure out some ideas that we could then bring into our communities to make sure that this is not something that continues to hold back opportunity for families and for small businesses.
Just point well taken. That's one of the reasons why I added it as an infrastructure, because we all understand the concept of roads, sidewalks, curb, gutter, sewer, but this is a service infrastructure that without it, we can't have that growth. So I know the county has participated in several statewide planning and rulemaking processes. I know that the county has also opened up more zoning districts for daycare and in-home daycare and commercial daycare centers as well. So I think those sorts of things are going the right direction. But you're right, economics are tough for those businesses.
Yeah, sorry I missed that part of the presentation with infrastructure. And then also zoning code. So Warrenton is now allowing more in-home daycare. So it has to be both sides to make sure that this is part of the community.
Yep, point well taken. Anything else? The process is moving forward. Again, it's a call to action, so speak kindly of me every chance you get. All right,
The only question I had is.
Go ahead.
You mentioned, the big three, yet the wages in the big three aren't growing. And I understand the need for to diversify, but those are our strengths.
those are our strengths, those are our assets. But they are in many ways being taken back. We are not being given the ability to use those resources like we historically have. Not that we want to go back and get rid of all the trees
Sure.
and get rid of all the fish and have a million more people coming here. But those rule changes are gonna allow us to do some forestry. They're going to allow us to do some fishing and food processing. But we've got to find ways to do it in a better way, a more environmentally sound way, a more sustainable way. And I know those are buzzwords. One of the things that I didn't talk about was the blue economy. That's a research and innovation concept where I'm working right now with Oregon State University. I don't know their names, otherwise I would drop them. But I've talked to Oregon State University and their food research group up in Astoria. We are at the intersection of the most important river in the Northwest and the biggest ocean. Why are we not bringing in research? Why are we not trying to find new ways to deal with wastewater treatment and water issues? Why are we not researching these things? Oregon State University said I could bring 10 professors here if I could find a place to house them. And think of the teaching that could happen. One of the phrases I use, and some people don't like it, but I like it, from CTE to PhD. Our schools should be the training ground for people who want to work in these fields. Those people should have the ability to go to Clatsop Community College and get additional training, either to go into a certificate field or to move on to OSU or any other university to get a BA, an MA, and a PhD. That all should be available here. And if we do it right, a number of ports are creating these research innovation centers, and we could do it. I know we could. It wouldn't be the size of San Diego's, but it could be effective. So there's some things that we can do to take what we're good at and get smarter about it. And that's all I'm trying to figure out.
On point, trying to do a bunch of the things we're talking about as far as contracts. So why aren't we just pounding them to get more and more of what they're doing?
They're on the list.
Because that seems more realistic to me than hoping for the great research center. Not saying that it can't happen, but that's, I don't know. That is here.
Tongue Point is part of the issue. Having Clatsop Community College, having MERTS, having OSU here, those three are critical parts to this. Where we need to be focusing on is how do we create the entrepreneurial spirit? How do we teach those people to take those ideas and move them into some sort of research and then hopefully into some sort of job and or business? And that this is not going to happen in 1 or 2 years.
Right.
This is a long-term thing.
Right.
And it's like turning the Titanic. You got to start.
Yeah.
And so that's where I'm hopefully headed, is to try and spark some interest that I can get all of the people at the table to talk about this and move it forward. That's just one example.
Yeah.
The same is true with forestry. The mass timber process that everyone has been talking about. Why can't we do some of that here? How do we get that here? Now, I don't have an answer for it, but I know it's out there. Food processing, the state is going to be investing in food processing and we already have a lot of that here. Why can't we capitalize on this new state investment and bring more research and more dollars to our area? So it's a big thing. It's a big thing. And if I can get people to motivated to move in a direction, then the plan has been successful. So anything else from the group? Then I am going to introduce our next speaker, who is new to the group. No, she's not. Alyssa Gertler is going to talk to us a little bit about the ONA methodology and a local response.
Before I do that, I just want to say, have you guys ever heard that quote, "What got you here won't get you there"? It's like I feel like that's the theme of our meeting today is what got us here won't get us there. And, whether it's the environmental changes or the economic changes or the fact that we have a giant whole gap in our housing production, like we've gotten to the point we've gotten for all the reasons we've gotten. And whether we now think about the floodplain differently, we think about the economy differently, we think about housing differently, that's kind of where we're at, right? Is we actually have to do things differently. And luckily there are new people coming here with new ideas. There are people who've been here for a long time who know how we got where we got and the issues that we face and why we face them. And in theory, we can actually continue to evolve as a county. And I think it's interesting when we're touching multiple subject areas with the same thing, the economy, the environment, housing, and they all touch each other, right? And they all come together in the fact that our land is scarce and our land is valuable, and it is also our biggest asset. And we may have used it as a resource to extract from, but that is a limited model that needs to be looked at in a longer term perspective. So I'm just really struck by this meeting. Before I get into my part of it, which is actually housing, so we are going to talk about housing in this meeting.
Sorry.
Save the best for last.
Although they all fit together, which is kind of the point, right? Right, it's really, when Gail talks about the new regulations affecting developable land, we already don't have developable land, right? When we talk about how close the economy is tied to housing, we all know it. I'm not telling you anything new. But speaking of not telling you anything new, we've been talking about the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis for the better part of a year, I think. We had Sean from DLCD here earlier this summer to give us an update on the process. I think most of you are tracking. It's basically the state legislature has passed a series of bills over the last 4 or 5 years, basically institutionalizing a statewide housing needs and production process into the state land use system. And so for the last year, I've been serving on this committee that is actually now taking the legislation and making the rules that DLCD will now be responsible for implementing. And it's been really eye-opening, and I'm really glad Brett is here because I think the reason we have it on today's agenda is because there is a milestone coming up, and I wanted to just touch base with everybody about how we might interact with it. Some of the rules are gonna they're gonna take effect January 1st, 2025. So the rulemaking process is coming to an end. And the part where we get to have public comment is coming up. And the current part that is available for public comment is the methodology, not the actual rules, but the methodology that not DLCD, but the Department of Administrative Services is using to basically calculate the targets that the state is gonna give each jurisdiction for how much housing we all need to produce. And they had an interim methodology that they used for a previous, and now they are updating it. And the updates include better methodology for counting people experiencing homelessness and better methodology for counting vacation and second homes, which both factors really affect our production. And so the methodology is out. It is super wonky. I did not make a PowerPoint with a formula of 1.06 vacancy rate times housing production over 20 years, but it is available if any of you would like to see it. And the way they've done it is they've basically grouped counties into regions. So we are with Columbia and Tillamook County as the North Coast region. And it's an interesting preliminary finding in terms of what our targets are gonna be. Right, if you look at the 3 counties, it's by income level. So they're looking at how much do you need between 0 to 30, how much do you need 30 to 60, all the way up to 120 plus. And the way they look particularly at the vacation homes and second homes are that most of those are in the 120 plus if they're new, or if they're older, they're in the 80 to 100, which I'm not sure if we all agree with that or not, right? And that may be one of the comments we would want to submit is that we would assume the supply of those would be in the 120+% of median income, especially in most of the cities, I think.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to sort of wrap my head around what we want to comment on. You know, I don't know that even any of us are really qualified to take apart this analytical methodology other than the realities that we all see, which is vacation homes are not market rate. Based especially on what Jay just said about the wages in our county. To cut to the chase, the number that they're looking at is about 15,000 homes across the 3 counties in 20 years. So just simple math, we get a third of that, right? Each county gets a third, a third, a third. We now have to produce 5,000 homes over 20 years. Now you divide that by 5,000 by 20 years, that's 250 houses a year. Now you can divide that by 5 cities, and now each of you have to produce 50 homes a year. So you might want to start deciding when you want to count those homes, right? Tiffany, when does North Post 66 go online? And obviously this all matters mostly to Astoria, who is the one jurisdiction required to produce the housing production strategy and housing capacity analysis, describing how that city will meet these targets over time. But as Mayor Wright says in every meeting that we're in, this is actually a regional conversation that we need to have, right? We're all involved in this together. And different jurisdictions are going to have different opportunities and tools to make this happen. So my question to you is, do we want to submit a letter? And this can come from staff, it doesn't have to come from councils. Discussing our comments on the methodology, right? I've been wrestling with this for a couple weeks, looking at the methodology. We know we have a shortage of housing. We know we have a gap, right? Literally all of our analyses that we show that we have missing housing. And if you look at the state's methodology, they particularly say that we are lacking housing at the lowest income ranges. And again, I don't think that surprises any of us. And so part of me is like, this isn't really wrong of a conclusion, what they got to, right? That we might quibble a little bit with the income levels on the second and vacation homes in general. I think the other key issue is, do we all define second and vacation homes the same way? What's the data that we're actually using to describe where people live? And different ones of us may approach that differently. And so we probably want to be on the same page with the state, like, do they mean the same thing that we mean by vacation and second homes? So those are the 2 comments I think we would want to submit, but what I don't want to do is say, you're wrong, we don't need this much housing, because I think we do need this much housing. But based on what we just heard in the other conversation, particularly around FEMA, particularly around this buildable lands inventory work that we're doing, to me, the big question is, where are we going to put this housing? What is it going to look like with no buildable land? And right, the answer from the state so far and the rules that they're making contemplate density, contemplate more efficient use of land, redevelopment and infill. And we know, based on our infrastructure issues, based on our land issues, based on our financial situation, we need significant investment in order to make that happen, and we need regulatory intervention in order to make it happen, probably at every level of government. And so to me, the issue is not so much how much do we need, it's how in the heck are we going to make it happen? And so that comes later in the public comment, right? Because then the third part is, there's rules, we set these targets, City of Astoria takes the lead for all of us and says, this is what we commit to. And then we struggle. And then the state says, shame on you, you didn't meet your targets. Now you're in our housing acceleration program where you're underperforming, and the state is going to come in and intervene and XYZ. There's a whole set of rules about what's in this housing accountability, housing acceleration, including you don't get to make your own land use decisions. And so I don't think any of us want to find ourselves. Maybe that's a good thing, right? The state's making us do it.
Real soon, but yes, that
So-
doesn't work.
Yeah.
Does that mean Brett gets to review applications?
No, that's the Housing Accountability and Production Office. But really, I mean, part of the whole thing where the HAPO, the Housing Accountability and Production Office, is going to be doing, if there is as I'm understanding it, and Alyssa, you know, are more kind of knee deep into this and kind of working through some of the rules as well as, you know, that what they will be doing is looking at the different jurisdictions and trying to ascertain if there are codes that are first of all preventing um you know the targets or the thresholds to be able to be met, and working to be able to resolve those issues. It's kind of an exercise there where it's like looking at, are there certain aspects of, for instance, again, the city of Astoria's ordinance, since they're the ones that are over the 10,000 threshold, that would you know, that are not or they're preventing for some of this to happen, is really how the HAPO office will be looking at that.
And so how does that match up with goal one, public participation?
Well, there still will have to be code amendments that are done, and then goal one will still be going through the whole process for uh, you know, any amendment to the code. It's not saying that the HAPO office will come in and say, okay, your codes are changed automatically. The city would still have to go through all the same planning commission, public hearing process, city council public hearing process to amend the codes. So goal one is still relevant here. It's just that there would be, you know, if a jurisdiction falls in the housing acceleration program, then there's going to be kind of a review to make sure those things are dealt with. I mean, if you go back to the day and the age when there was periodic review, I mean, when there would be times that, you know, the state would be saying, hey, there's some parts of the code, a jurisdiction's code, which are not up to date and according to Oregon revised statutes. The jurisdiction their codes through a standard public hearing process.
Right, I understand that, but when the public hearing process is, we don't want it, and, you know.
Well, but this is right. Right. But we have the legislative, you know, directives that have come already for, Jay, before you were director over in Warrenton, I think Kevin Cronin was the director. Um, there was a situation where the Warrenton Planning Commission said, we don't want accessory dwelling units. And they denied the code amendment. But then they had to come back in and say, okay, the legislature said that we have to approve this. And so it became something to be able to work with whenever there was a legislative, you know, law that came into place that the jurisdiction had to do that. Or else, you know, what we see is many times if a jurisdiction doesn't take an action on a code, then a certain base ordinance applies and supersedes the local jurisdiction.
I think our key question here is really, how does goal one apply to FEMA? Right, I actually think I think Gail really set the tone for this meeting in terms of housing production, recognizing that that is gonna put a significant cost, time, uncertainty into the housing production process. And, you know, DLCD, Brett, you're kind of in the middle of both the FEMA stuff and the housing stuff. And I do actually think this is the question I wanted to circle back on earlier. Jay likes when I use jargon, is how are we gonna have guidance, intervention, assistance in reconciling what's happening around the BIOP with these housing production goals? And I know Gail's asked that in other meetings, we've all talked about it, and I think it's a big question mark that we need to sort of get on the same page with the state about, because we're gonna have significant constraints on building.
Yeah, and I'll say that this specific question, I know has made its way up to the governor's office.
Yeah.
I hear about it, you know, in conversations with Nate Stice with the regional solutions team, and so, you know, I don't have the answer. I know that it's having to be uh, looked into through our housing team, and the Pick'em from FEMA came down right as the housing staff were kicking off the housing rulemaking.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, so this is all, coming together all at the same time. And unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you, but I know that it's at least it is something made it up to the governor's office, the governor's push to be able to have these additional housing units built across the state, and and the concerns about being able to achieve those targets because of this vision which is coming from FEMA, and we're all having to work to deal with it. I wish I had a better answer, Alyssa, but that's what I've got right now.
No, I mean, I think that's basically a good status report on where things are, and I think it just underscores the challenge we're gonna face around whether it's economic growth or housing production and meeting the targets that we're setting. And so my question really for the group is, do we feel that it's important to submit a letter during this public comment period about the methodology? And I'm happy to, just this conversation is helping me frame what I think we would want to talk about, which is, I kind of have this, every meeting I go to on the housing needs analysis, I say, you can't give us rules without giving us tools. And I kind of feel like that's our theme here is, we don't dispute that we need housing, but we are gonna need help in order to overcome all of the barriers that we face in order to do it. But none of you here want to say we should argue for less housing, right?
I think a big thing for us is gonna be the methodology in calculating the second homes. It'll be the same issue with Cannon Beach.
I think that's huge.
You can't count that as part of our current housing stock.
No, they take it out, so they just make our targets higher.
Well, but at the same time, are they taking out an accurate number? How are they basing that count off? I've tried to do it based on water usage, and even that was difficult, with a small sample. So what is the methodology for that? You can't use the mailing address of the property owner, because it could be a long-term rental house.
Right, or it
Which
could be
is
an
part of it.
LLC or lots of
Right,
things.
so what is the methodology for actually making that count? I think that's important for at least, maybe even Astoria too, but us on the south side of the county, we're
Definitely.
very tourist driven compared to the north.
And I think each jurisdiction might take a slightly different approach to trying to get to that. How do we measure our own vacation rentals? What do we think it is? Do we look at voter registration, right? And so I do think to the extent that we are able to have alignment with what the state is using as their methodology and agreement, that will work in our favor. Because not only does it set the targets, but then it becomes the baseline upon which we're gonna be measuring going forward for the next 20 years. So to me, that is the biggest comment, right? What's the data source? What do we agree on? And then I think the other key issue is assuming that they're all at a higher income level. What's interesting then is how that affects the formula of what we need to produce, because we're not really saying that we're gonna produce a bunch more single family, high income housing. As part of a housing production strategy, that's probably gonna happen whether we say it or not.
Yeah.
Right? We are gonna have to be responsible for how are we gonna meet, I think it's 25% below 30%, 20%, 25% below 30%, 25% between 30% and 80%, and then all the rest of the housing is above 80%. So
So you and I have talked before too, a lot of this discussion surrounding redevelopment. Redevelopment of a property, yes, you might get 2 housing units out of one, but you're taking 1 housing unit that was likely lower cost
right, and
out of the inventory at that point for 2 middle or higher cost housing units.
exactly.
That's a good point.
Then how do you keep that from becoming another second home?
Well, right, that's what Cannon Beach has been wrestling with, which is we can make smaller dwelling units, and then are we just making smaller vacation rentals without any other tools to manage that? And I think you guys both have that same dilemma. Yeah,
So my suggestion would be to comment what we talked about on the methodology, and then when we get to the actual numbers and the next step, that's when we probably need to really dive into it further.
yeah.
That's my thought.
So I'll take a stab at a letter. It'll come from the technical nerd, so it won't have to go through council. Any planning directors that want to sign on, I'd be happy to have you guys sign on with me. So that we can all, because I do think it matters that we, as the recreational communities, weigh in on the
Yeah.
vacation home methodology. We're gonna be affected by it.
Yep.
So, and, be happy to share it. So it's due next Friday, so it'll be coming.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. Yeah, done.
I've been thinking about it for a while, but I really wanted to get your guys' feedback. And I don't think it'll be a long letter. It'll, and anybody who wants to look at the whole thing, I'm happy to send it to you.
Okay.
That's it.
Any other comments about ONA? Anything for the good of the order?
Unless I recommend a short letter in all shouty caps.
A sternly
Two
worded
sentences is
email.
fine.
WTF.
Exactly.
Okay.
Comic Sans.
All right, with that, I am going to declare the meeting done. I hope that you all have had a good time, enjoyed something, learned something, and we'll see you again soon.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.